Hey. Okay, everyone. My name is Frank Rietta, and I'm going to do something a little weird. Does everyone here know your neighbor? If not, turn and introduce yourself and say hello, neighbor. It's always a good thing. So now I'm going to ask a couple questions. So, who here has ever worked in a software development organization, either a small company or a development team in the bigger company? Okay. It's actually more than I thought, so that's good. So now the next question is, who has been the second or third person on the technical team after the technical co-founder? Yep. Yeah, that's about what I thought. So Brandon and you, sir. So and this is kind of a trick question we're going to get into later. Who has seen agile development and software security work well together? Awesome. So we have one hand raised. So I'm going to start out with a quote. Why are we here? So our keynote this morning asked us to always ask that question. And from a technical point of view, why am I here talking about web application development? Why am I talking about developers? Why am I not talking about some firewall or tool that we can put on our network or scanning or all these other amazing things that we can do in security? And it's because there is no perimeter. The only perimeter that you have is any place that makes an access control decision. And that ultimately means the only security you have is software security. So you can put all sorts of tools on your network, and if the software is fundamentally insecure, if you have authentication bypass problems, if you have unpatched dependencies that you're depending on that can be popped, you're going to end up getting breached. And the only people capable of solving that is your development team. So if we want to be successful in security, we have to work with our development teams. So, this is my controversial statement. Security is compatible with agile development. And I'll go as far as to say that security is increasingly dependent on agile development. And that's not where we are now, but it's going to be where we're going to be, because we are now entering a time where the automated hacks take place in seconds or minutes. When an unpatched vulnerability in your dependency chain needs to be patched, we don't have months to go through enterprise change management. A computer system must see the release, download the update, run the automated test suite, and if the test suite passes, auto-deploy to production without human intervention. Not many of us are here yet, but that's where we need to be. And this is only possible with automated tests. And when I mean automated tests, I mean a test suite that runs as often as necessary and exercises every facet of the software. This is different than your QA teams who test things before they're released or look at the user interactions. And the only way that happens, well, actually, I guess I slipped through the slide. So the tool that can do that is continuous integration. Continuous integration, when your developers commit code to the master branch or to an approved branch in your revision control system, the continuous integration environment checks out the code. It runs all the tests, and it deploys the software. A lot of internet companies now deploy dozens, if not hundreds of times per day using a process like this. And the way you get consistent tests is to have test-driven development as part of what your team does. How many people are familiar with this term? A few. Test-driven development has been around for a while. It's not new. The premise is this. When you're a programmer and you read a requirement for a feature in the software, you don't then go and write code thinking that the QA team is going to test it later. You write a failing test. So you have this software that's the test suite, and by definition, if the feature doesn't isn't implemented, then the test that exercises the feature fails. So you write a failing test. You then implement the feature, and then you watch the test pass. And then you write another test, and you implement the next element. There's a couple of different approaches. You can hear about end-to-end testing, which will exercise features through the controller actions of the web-based software. This is different from unit testing. So you're not necessarily testing low-level functions. You're testing interactions through the web stack. And once the tests pass, you deploy. And in continuous integration environments, that is true. If a programmer has implemented a new feature, the tests pass, it gets merged into the master branch, then the continuous integration is going to deploy it that very hour, not necessarily waiting for months to pass for some approval process. This is a very different approach to development. But the end game of this is you have those automated tests to support continuous integration. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Git workflow. I want you to understand how developers can work when everything goes through a source control system. So this graphic is from github.com. It's on their documentation. And so you have the master code branch, and you check out what's called a feature branch. You work on your code for the feature, and then when you are done, you then do what is called submit for a pull request. And when a pull request is submitted, this is where the other people on your team, and they have little chat bubbles to try to show that you can talk. You literally can comment on lines of code like, man, I see what you're doing here in the test pass, but you really shouldn't request a record in the middle of a for loop over the IDs because that's going to be very slow. So that would be a code quality problem called an N+1 situation. So instead of asking the database once, the programmer has created a case where it's going to say request, 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 and that's going to be a performance problem. Or it could be, wow, you call skip authentication on this controller action. Why are you skipping our security tests? That's not something that we want to be in this code. So you have a built-in process here to do a code review as a collaborative discussion before this gets merged into the branch. And the tools that developers use these days support that level of collaboration. And this is pair programming, when it's available, is actually a fairly cost-effective way to do code review. So in a pair programming environment, all code ends up getting written by 2 programmers. In a smaller startup, even when this is not happening, the pull request model ends up going part of the way there. So if I write some functionality, I think it's great, but it's not going to go live until my coworker Brandon has looked at it and we both agree that this is reasonable. And sometimes that might be a discussion that's like, well, why are you doing this way? What's our design challenges? Sometimes it might just be a cursory look like, yeah, it's ready to go. But I, on my own, don't just submit code into the master branch. So our tools allow us to do an approval process like that. But the turnaround time is still within hours, not some long drawn-out period of time. So now I'm going to talk about startups. Because we talked about when you were on the technical team of a small company. Startups are not actually just small versions of a big company. And those that think they are often fail. So you might ask, what do I mean by a startup? It's not actually an amount of money. Because some startups have a lot of money. The investors, toss up a few $1 million to get started. That's not the problem. What a startup is an organization, they're still searching for a sustainable business model. So they're trying things out. They're doing experiments. They write some software. They put it out on real customers. They see what those customers buy. No one buys it. Okay, we're going to pivot. We're going to do something else. We're going to do something else. We're going to do something else. So they're constantly changing. And that's literally their job, is to find out, how do we have a market? What do we do? Well, when you're that sort of environment, security is often not the first consideration. We're moving fast. Some might say we move fast and break things. This has been credited. This is a fun little cartoon there. So jobs I've been fired from: FedEx driver, crane operator, and so forth. The person who said this has, I think in testimony, he just said, what is it, move fast with stable infrastructure? Okay. But then what happens? So, you got the owner of the startup, the founder. They get a business deal going. There's an enterprise. There's a government client coming. They want to do a little song and dance like we're moving on up. But then the next question comes. Oh, I guess my slide's got out of order. Oh, well. So anyway, so they want to do this. But then the question is, well, tell me about your security. Tell me about how your developers go about protecting our data. How is your operations set up? And what they built, like what is the startup actually built? It's a web application. You know, it's running on Amazon AWS. It has some database. It's doing some things. It has a JSON API that's hopefully authenticated, unlike Panera Breads. And the team is impossibly small. So what could possibly go wrong? All sorts of things could go wrong. I mean, that's why we're here, right? We're in security. They can break every OWASP top 10 rule there is. They can forget about SQL injection, and statistically they will. They can just throw up sensitive data and expose it because, they didn't know what they were doing. Lots of things can go wrong. And if you ask developers who are likely building your web applications, they are not necessarily from a security background. Hey, how many of you know about the OWASP things? I'm not saying how many implement it, how many know it perfectly, how many have heard about it. Okay? And, well, at least 60% have, but that means 40% haven't even heard of it. So if you have 3 or 4 people on your team, you're lucky sometimes if any one of them has heard of the OWASP, let alone can tell you what SQL injection is. I mean, Brandon, I'm just going to interrupt. Of the people we've interviewed, how many people are like, okay, I got to go read that? Okay. They have to go read it. They really haven't read it yet. So, and we're a security company. So this is a challenge for education. And so when you get that questionnaire, they ask hundreds of inscrutable questions that the owner can't answer. And so that's where now you come in. You have a software product. You have some traction. The startup is moving in the right direction. They got 6 people, y'all. This is not some big company. But a lot of money is on the line for passing this security audit that's coming down. So you're tasked with taking this team and growing it into a policy-driven organization, first to meet the minimum requirements so they can get this business, but ultimately, to do the right thing. And here's the trick. So those of us who've worked in bigger companies, we're like, well, we know how to do security policy. There is this NIST 800 series. There's this ISO number. If you take that big old chunkin' document and you dump it on the desk, they're not going to do it, and the CEO is going to walk you out to your car and thank you for stopping by. It's not going to work. So the steps to implement a policy, there are a couple of advantages. One, understand why it is that they all of a sudden care about policy. Because chances are it's not because policy is awesome. It's because, and we all love doing our tax returns. It's because, some businesses on the line. And I think they realize it. If you have 6 people and you're making a little money, I mean, you look out over the hill and you're like, man, we could cross 100,000 in revenue. Within 6 more months, we're at $1 million. Like, we're a growing company. We want to do what's right. So there's a little bit of that, puffing up, yay us. But reality is, they still got to write software. They still got to do those iterations. They're going to have a whole host of feature requests coming in that they're going to have to do. But you have a small team, guys. This is great. Awareness is almost free. You can talk to everybody. You can literally sit down with the development team and get to know them and say, hey, can you show me what you're doing? And the person who's been there since person number 2, they took a below market rate job because they had a vision to see this thing through. And honestly, appealing to them wanting to do the right thing works. Like, this is not usually someone who's just checking the box to get a paycheck. That's a bigger company problem. They're not here. So another thing, when you go to write policy, a lot of times in big corporations, policy and procedures are separated. And this is for document management reasons, because you got to get things approval. At this stage, that's a little bit too much for most of these organizations. You want to combine that and be more prescriptive. So, for example, I'm not going to make a vague statement. I'm going to say, you shall turn on two-factor everywhere. And then you go through and you make sure they do. You help them succeed. And then you do the next little step. Let's see, which example did I use? No password sharing. So you get LastPass set up. You go get the CEO's GoDaddy account plugged in. You change his password from Hunter2 to something a little bit better. You're gonna. By the way, business owners have the worst passwords ever. And don't forget this. You can have the best security on your AWS account in the world. If the CEO's personal GoDaddy account is still controlling the domain, you got problems, because someone can take that, can use that to man in the middle your network, and you may not detect that right away. That actually happened to a bank down in Brazil, I think, where their ATMs were pwned, basically because someone could gain control of the GoDaddy account. Was there one more point there? Oh yeah, just iterate. So the point is, start with small wins and then iterate from there. Like, don't try to dump, a 1,200 point compliance document on them. It's just not going to work. So what are some quick technical wins? So some of the ones I think you can definitely do is the password sharing. In my experience, almost everyone's like, oh yeah, we should do that. Yeah, I floss too. Like, it's no one admits that sounds like a bad idea. You sometimes have to explain it though. Like, okay, so let me explain what happens when you use the same password everywhere. So they find it on your email, and then they try it everywhere else. Oh. You can usually, oftentimes at this company size, the company doesn't own all the computers. So people have their own Macs. They are still working from coffee shops. Don't try to fight that battle. You're not going to win it at this stage. But what you can do is say, you know what? If one of our laptops is stolen, it's a bad problem. You can get them to turn on two-factor, full disk encryption. Mandate 2FA. You can also, this one's big. You may not be able to do this overnight. So developers at this stage often have access to production. And depending on the nature, you can either separate the AWS account from development into production. That's a good practice. If the enterprise account that they're just signing is of sufficient size, you may consider spinning up a completely separate production environment for just that account, because a company at this stage, multi-tenant may not be the smartest thing if all of a sudden they're going to have like one client that's like paying them $1 million a year, and every other client combined is still, they're still, they have a valuable piece of software, and that helps you a little bit. Let's shove that data over here for now and separate it from our others. And start with the basics for the developers. Like, set them up for winning. Like, kind of our presenter a little bit earlier said, you did a great job reporting that fish. It's kind of the same thing. It's like, oh man, you did a great job summarizing the OWASP top 10 rule for, how SQL injection works. Like, yeah. And then you set them up that this kind of becomes gained. You can set up the code reviews. Like, that's a great way to implement this. And just be working with these people, because, they're your team. And ultimately, they're the ones who are going to end up implementing security. So, in conclusion on this, your developers are the people that you ultimately have to work with. And this only works if you're collaborative. So I can jokingly say, go to your development group, give them a big hug, and say, we love you guys. We want to make your job, we want to make you shine. We want to help you keep the company safe, do what's right by all of our users. Hey, did you hear about, that time that, I don't want to name the wrong name, I'm sorry. That time that this internet company that everyone's heard of had their backup copy on some credentials on a GitHub account, and that led to the copy. Like, we don't want that around here. Let me help you not do that. Like, make them your friends and work with them. Training developers is interesting. Remember, these are very technical people. They know how to code. They are used to using Linux or Macs or whatever they're doing. They probably own their own computers, especially in the early stage. So you're not going to be able to come down with a bunch of corporate rules, and it's not going to fly. So focus on the things that you can win. Some areas for your security policy would be things like your bring your own device policy. So if I can't own your computer, at least I can make it be dedicated to a work purpose. It's not the same one that your teenager is gaming on. You can make sure it's encrypted, password policies. You can work on their management of credentials. You can, get them to not store in production and credentials in source control. And let me actually show y'all. This is what one example of one of these documents looks like. It's only 11 pages, and it's a prescriptive security policy, so it covers both, like the high level and it's designed ultimately that everyone in the company can read it. And you start with a information classification. That's usually a good thing that a lot of small companies aren't going to have. Is that going to render? Oh, it might be a straight blank page. Bring your own device. Don't do jailbreaking. Full disk encryption. You can audit for mandate operating system updates, data deletion, and then what I like to do at the end is have a questionnaire. So this is designed so that you can actually get people to say, hey, have you read this? Yes. Do you understand that, all your work has to be in concordance with this, yes or no? And if they answer no to anything, then, they have to go read it again, or you have to work with that. And you can do different things with it. I want to have as many discussions as possible. Who here has gone through any part of this process before? What do you? Any questions? Mm-hmm. Right. Brandon, yeah, go ahead.
I think at that stage you want to be starting to leverage more types of, network level scanning, automated system scan, basically more automation and more monitoring, so that you can actually just see the state of all that stuff. There's always a lot of talks about that kind of stuff here, how to use particular tools, but I think you can start with pretty basic stuff and just say like, hey, like, do we have any containers running that haven't been re-imaged in past month, or like whatever, and just start getting reports that you can look at and start to make decisions on. Because usually you start without any visibility of all that, and just do monitoring, and you can apply all that to security. You can start having security tests as part of the automated testing, and just be continually building that. There's a lot of that stuff that can prevent you from needing to hire new people. So it's just a question of making sure that the upper level people understand that it's a strategic investment up front. And I think that stuff can carry you a really long way, and just keep building what you get. I think beyond that, you get into organizational training and just more aggressive use of secure technologies like centralized secret management, this kind of thing. And I don't have a lot of experience with that yet, but it seems like there's a lot of disproportionate yield towards adapting to these things.
I've got another minute or so. Anything else? Thank you. Sure. Not a topic everyone talks about every day. It's like, wait, what does the beginning look like?